Football in Scotland was theoretically a game for amateurs until 1893, and so receiving payment for playing football was technically illegal. The Scottish Football Association were lagging behind their English counterparts, who had legalised professional football in 1885. So before football turned pro in Scotland, transfer fees officially could not exist. Of course, there are reports of under-the-counter payments between clubs, as well as the practice of illegally paying players being rife. One notable early transfer is that of striker Willie Groves, who moved from Hibernian to the newly founded Celtic Football Club in 1888. Of course, on paper this was a free transfer, but it is likely that some cash was exchanged. Groves was the first star striker of Celtic's first ever competitive side, and scored a goal a game for the boys if records are accurate. He was then lured by the legit riches on offer down south in the English Pro League, and moved to West Brom in 1890, helping them win the FA Cup. In 1893, Groves became the first footballer to command a transfer fee of over £100, which Aston Villa were made to pay, plus a £50 fine to acquire his services, a total which equates to about £16,000 in today's money. Now, as we are looking so far back, it is not easy to find information, but as far as I can tell, Celtic said about breaking the record multiple times in the late 1890s. Forward Johnny Campbell joined from Villa for a signing-on fee of £70 in 1897. A few months later, inside left Peter Somers joined from Hamilton for £120. There may have been other transfers in Scotland for more at this time, but I personally could find no evidence of them. But in 1889, Celtic unequivocally set a new record when they splashed an astronomical fee of £320 on left-back David Storier from Everton. The dependable defender went on to captain Celtic and made a total of 40 appearances for them in 3 years. Most clubs in Scotland used the transfer market sparingly back then, as money was scarce in Scottish football, preferring to develop their own young talents. But as far as I can tell, Rangers broke the record in 1913 when they signed Scott Duncan from Newcastle for £750. Then in 1922, a historic and monumental transfer happened about which there can be no doubt. English forward Sid Puddifoot had been banging in the goals for West Ham and was a star England international. During World War I, he had been stationed in Bridge of Allan, Scotland, and made some appearances for Falkirk. Desperate to bring him to Scotland permanently, the club, helped in part by funds raised by their fans, broke the world transfer record and signed Super Sid for £5,000, a fee that would work out as £237,000 today. Football transfer fees were spiralling out of control. When will this folly on the part of football clubs come to an end? What is to be the limit? Is there to be a limit? Cried the Football Post. This remains the only time that a Scottish club has held the world transfer record. They did not have it for long though, as a month later Warnie Cresswell transferred from South Shields to Sunderland for £5,500. Puddifoot stayed at Falkirk for 3 years, scoring 45 goals before being sold to Blackburn Rovers for £4,000. In Scotland though, it was a record that stood for a long time. Rangers equalled it in 1927 when they signed inside left Bob McPhail from Airdrieonians. McPhail is a Rangers legend, and his record of 230 league goals stood for over half a century, until finally being broken by Ali McCoist in 1997. It wasn't until 25 years after Puddifoot signed for Falkirk that his record was finally smashed in Scotland. In the first season back, after football had been abandoned during World War II, Hibernian signed striker Leslie Johnson from Clyde for £10,000, roughly £327,000 today. After scoring 8 goals in 9 appearances, he was sold back to Clyde for the same amount, for whom he scored 17 goals in 30 appearances before once again breaking the transfer record, signing for Celtic for £12,000. This made him the first ever player to accumulate over £30,000 on all his combined transfer fees. He struggled being played out of position at Celtic and was sold to Stoke for £9,000 after only a year. In 1947, Billy Steele broke the British transfer record when he moved from Morton to Derby County for £15,500. After 3 seasons at the baseball ground, Dundee obliterated the Scottish transfer record, forking out an incredible £22,500, the equivalent of £645,000 today. He proved to be a worthwhile investment, helping the club to win 2 League Cups and reach a Scottish Cup final in his 4 years there. The record remained untouched for over a decade, with only Jim Baxter's £17,500 transfer from Raith Rovers to Rangers in 1960 coming close. This did represent a record fee between 2 Scottish clubs though, and when Baxter was sold to Sunderland for £72,500 in 1965, it represented the highest fee ever received by a Scottish club at the time. 3 years later, and Rangers set the new price to beat, nabbing George McLean from St Mirren for £26,500, £468 £38,000 today. Dundee formed a formidable strike partnership with Jim Forrest and scored 87 goals in 117 appearances, winning the league once and 2 Scottish Cups in the process. And Rangers were not shy in whipping the chequebook out in the 60s, and the Scottish transfer record was broken frequently. Charlie Cook swapped Dundee for Aberdeen for £40,000 in 1964. In 66, Rangers brought Alex Smith from Dunfermline for £55,000. In the same month they acquired Dave Smith, no relation, from Aberdeen for £50,000. A year later and Rangers were at it again and bought the exciting forward Alex Ferguson, who had been tearing it up for Dunfermline, for £65,000. In 68, things it seemed were getting out of control and the Jars shattered their own record, breaking the market in the process, shelling out a somewhat obscene £100,000, £1.5 million today, on hotshot striker Colin Stein. Stein's 97 goals for the club helped them to 2 League Cups and a UEFA Cup Winners' Cup. Stein scored the opening goal of the final against Dynamo Moscow to send Rangers on their way to a 3-2 win. In the 70s, things quietened down somewhat. In 74, Hibs forked out £120,000 to Everton for former record-breaking Aberdeen goal machine Joe Harper. Harper never really did the business for Hibs in his 2 years at the club, and Hibs took a massive loss on him, selling him back to Aberdeen for £50,000. In 1978, Celtic's £125,000 for Davy Provan from Kilmarnock was just enough to set a new record. The exciting and mesmerising winger is an all-time Celtic great and won 4 league titles, 2 Scottish Cups and a League Cup in his 9 years at the club. In the 80s, things flew off the handle again. Rangers kicked off the decade with a strong signal of intent, breaking the bank and nearly doubling the record for Dundee midfielder Ian Redford. The £210,000 they spent on him equates to £873,000 today. Then, just a month later, Celtic decided to get involved and make history. The £270,000 they paid Liverpool for striker Frank McGarvey was money well spent. In his 5 years at Celtic, he made 245 appearances, scoring 113 goals and winning 2 league titles, 2 Scottish Cups and a League Cup. In the summer of 1981, Alex Ferguson broke the record when he shelled out £330,000 for winger Peter Weir from St Mirren. Despite suffering from injuries during his 6 years at Pittodrie, Weir was a vital part of that brilliant Aberdeen side of the 80s and won 2 league titles, 3 Scottish Cups and a European Cup Winners' Cup. In 84, Celtic decided to snap up lifelong Hoops fan and informed Watford striker Mo Johnston for £400,000. In 3 seasons at Celtic, he formed a lethal partnership with Brian McClare and bagged himself 52 goals in 99 appearances, as well as winning a league title and a Scottish Cup. 2 years after swapping Celtic for Nantes, he would be involved in perhaps the most controversial transfer of all time. In 1989, he was set to become the Hoops' first ever £1 million man, with Celtic agreeing a deal with Nantes for £1.2 million to bring him back to Celtic Park, even though the deal was believed to be all but done.
I don't want any speculation about me going anywhere else. I just want to play for Celtic and that's fine.
Mojo backed out of it and sensationally signed for Rangers instead in a £1.5 million deal. Scandalous though it was, Johnston's signing did not break any records. In the years after Mo signed for Celtic, Chris Woods, Terry Butcher and Richard Gough had all joined Rangers in record-breaking deals. It was in fact Gough who became the first ever player to be sold to a Scottish team for over £1 million when the Jars bought him from Spurs for £1.1 million. In fact, Johnston was only 3 weeks late in setting a new transfer record because Trevor Stephen had arrived at Ibrox from Everton for £1.5 million in June. So, in terms of the transfer record, the 80s more or less belonged to Rangers. Kick-started by the arrival of ambitious manager Graham Souness in 1986, their plan to dominate Scotland and attract the world's best talent had rocket fuel poured over them when David Murray bought the club for £6 million in 1988, and Murray was just getting started. In 1990, Celtic got their own first £1 million player in the form of Hibs midfielder John Collins. The £2 million mark was breached with Rangers' record signing of Ukrainian midfielder Alexei Mikhailichenko in 1991. Trevor Stevens' £2.4 million return from Marseille, to whom Rangers had sold the winger for £5.5 million only the year before, was very briefly the highest fee in Scottish football history. In 1993, it was smashed by the purchase of Big Duncan Ferguson from Dundee United for not only a Scottish but a British record fee of £4 million.
Look at players around Britain at the present moment, the fees are escalating. It's not really anything that we've got great control over.
He spent a turbulent, troubled and controversial season at Rangers before being sold to Everton for the same price in 1994. Celtic were lagging far behind Rangers on and off the pitch, and in 1995 they made the club record signing of Andreas Thom for £2.2 million. This was completely blown out of the water in the same window, overshadowed by the audacious capture of Paul Gascoigne from Lazio for £4.3 million. In 3 years at the club, Gascoigne helped Rangers to win the last two of their iconic 9 league titles in a row. His form declined in his final season and he was sold to Middlesbrough in 1998 for £3.45 million. He scored 39 goals in 104 appearances in all competitions for Rangers. In 1996, Celtic were a few £100,000 away from eclipsing the Gascoigne fee, as they paid a club record £4 million for Bolton defender Alan Stubbs. In the 97 summer window, Rangers brought in a whole host of players, spending heavily in a bid to win the fabled 10 in a row. The spree included several significant outlays on Lorenzo Amoruso, Marco Negri and Sergio Perini, yet none of them set a new record. In 98, Rangers spent £25 million. They broke the record 3 times, first on fullback Arthur Newman for £4.5 million from PSV Eindhoven, then £5 million for midfielder Giovanni van Bronckhorst, before finally splashing £5.5 million on ex-Man United winger Andrei Kanchelskis. The following summer saw Celtic break the record for the first time in over a decade. Eyal Berkovic joined John Barnes' ill-fated Celtic Revolution from West Ham United for £5.75 million. Although the Israeli playmaker showed flashes of his brilliance, he was inconsistent and reportedly was causing rifts in an already toxic dressing room. He was sold to Man City for £1.5 million in 2001 after 42 appearances and 13 goals for the Hoops. The appointment of Martin O'Neill saw Celtic make some ambitious moves in the market and bring in a whole host of players who would go on to be instrumental to his success. Rav Douglas, Didier Agat, Alan Thompson and Yus Valgaeren all joined in the summer window, with Neil Lennon coming in from Leicester in December. It was the £6 million signing of Chelsea flop Chris Sutton that broke the record though. Sutton would go on to score 86 goals in 199 appearances across 5.5 seasons, becoming a fan favourite. The versatile forward's contribution helped Celtic win 4 league titles, 3 Scottish Cups, a League Cup and reach the final of the UEFA Cup. However, just a couple of months after Sutton's arrival, David Murray showed that his stated intention to spend £10 for every 5 that Celtic did was not just bluster.
Rangers would rather have an overdraft and win something than have no overdraft and not win something.
On the 23rd of November 2000, Rangers completed a signing which sent shockwaves through Scottish football. Chris Sutton's former Chelsea teammate, Norwegian striker Tore André Flo, joined Rangers for a staggering £12 million. A cult hero at Chelsea, Flo struggled with the weight of a fee that was ludicrous for Scottish football. For that money, fans were expecting Ronaldo Nazario. The price tag means that Flo was unfairly labelled a flop. He was actually a decent player for Rangers and scored 38 goals in 72 appearances in all competitions before being sold to Sunderland for a reported $8 million. The craziest thing is that Flo's fee was so astronomical that it is still to be beaten to this day. In a landscape where valuations have been going out of control, a lesson was learned from the Flo saga and things have sort of gone the opposite way in Scotland. Celtic have taken time to break their own record. 18 years after the transfer of Chris Sutton, Celtic brought Ozan Edouard in for £9 million, and 6 years after that, in this window just passed, they broke the record twice. First with a £9.5 million move for Norwich striker Adam Ida, then on deadline day they came very close to eclipsing Flo's record, splashing out £11 million on highly rated Augsburg midfielder Arne Engels. Now, if the Engels signing is a success, then Celtic could be tempted to part with a similarly large chunk of change in the future and could potentially set a new record. Personally, I feel that the £12 million spent on Flo will not be beaten for a long time. Even in this day and age, it is still a huge sum that is difficult to justify in Scottish football, especially when you consider what other clubs are able to spend. And that point brings me neatly to my honourable mentions. First, Paul Bernard, whose £1 million move from Oldham to Aberdeen makes him still the only player a club outside the old firm has spent 7 figures on. Second is Scott Brown, whose £4.4 million move from Hibs to Celtic remains the largest fee exchange between 2 Scottish clubs for a player. Celtic also broke another record this window. The £26 million they received from Brighton for Matt O'Reilly beat the £25 million received for Jota and Kieran Tierney before him. I think this record of fee received rather than spent is one that will be broken much more frequently. And if you would like to learn more about Tore André Flo, I made a documentary on his whole career. You can check it out here.